The Catholic Church has a rich history around the world, but don't overlook the uniqueness of its history right here in these United States of America. We'll talk about that history tonight, so please stay with us. Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from around the world. Before we get to tonight's guest, I got to go do a little bit of history of one of the great saints of the church, St. Francis Desales. He was born in 1567. That was a time when already the Protestant Reformation had been going on for 50 years. And more difficulties and the beginnings of some of the wars were taking place at that point. He was trained to be a lawyer. His father wanted him to be successful, but he felt the call to the priesthood, left the practice of the law, much to his father's chagrin, became a priest, and eventually was made the Bishop of Geneva, Switzerland, which was the capital of Calvinist Europe. Now, he couldn't even go to Geneva. He wasn't allowed in the city, but he evangelized all over Savoy and other areas nearby. And because of his use of a gentle approach and a focus on love and not on angry controversy, but there was a real gentle call to love and spiritual development, he was able to win many folks over, as well as help get a variety of Catholic missions and missionary works started in that area of Europe. For that reason, and his printing of so much, he's also the patron saint of Catholic newspapers, such as our own paper, National Catholic Reporter. Register, we're the Register. No, strike that.
Strike it.
Before I get struck dead. No, the National Catholic Register. I need a patron saint myself. And so, we pray for all the Catholic newspapers that we have around here. Our guest is already piping in quite accurately, because he's a good historian, is well known to the whole EWTN family because of his many TV series, his many appearances here on live shows for the last 21 years or so, and his teaching us about church history. So he should know it pretty well because he teaches it along with systematic theology at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland, a state of which, of course, is one of the original 13 colonies of the United States, and it was one with a rich Catholic history because it was founded as a Catholic colony. Father Connor's new book is called Pioneer Priests and Makeshift Altars. Gives a detailed account of Catholicism in early America, and he's here with us tonight to share more about it. So please welcome my good friend, Father Charles Connor.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Good to have you back.
It's been a while since we've been
I
together.
know it. You just, sometimes prying you people off of the East Coast is tough. We'd love to have you down here in the sunny South.
Well, I'm telling you, though, I have to begin this program tonight on a slight note of disappointment.
Yes. Now what did I do?
Yes, it was you. It was all your fault.
It's all my fault.
You were introducing St. Francis Desales.
Yes.
And there was one little point that I was hoping you'd bring in.
Which is?
Who educated Francis Desales?
I don't know.
The Jesuits.
Oh, that.
At the College of Louis le Grand in Paris. And
see, I didn't realize you'd go into our school.
It was your society, indeed, and I mean, who were greater defenders of the faith and greater apologists and really one of the great graces and fruits of the Counter-Reformation. was the work of the Jesuits and the establishment of your universities all through Europe.
As a matter of fact,
and look what they produced in Francis Desales, as you say, living in that hostile environment in Geneva.
Yeah.
So we have to get a good plug in there for the Jesuits.
Happy to do that. I just omitted that little point. But it is also the time of the flourishing of one of the great patrons saints of apologetics, namely St. Robert Bellarmine.
Robert Bellarmine.
Whose works were also extremely influential on the formation of our nation. Had a big impact on people like Thomas Jefferson.
Indeed they did. Indeed they did. Yes.
Yeah, even though he was a Catholic, they had a big influence.
Occasionally he reads from a Catholic author.
Yeah.
It didn't happen too often,
No,
however.
no, they didn't.
Those fellows were very much victims of both the Reformation and the secular Enlightenment. All the founding fathers were.
Yeah.
And there's certain lacunae in the actual foundational documents of this country from a Catholic perspective.
Right.
And your own Father Courtney Murray did a great deal of work on that in the 50s, and it was a little bit controversial in the 50s, but he's being restudied today to be somewhat reinterpreted. But in the reinterpretation of Murray, of course, his contributions were really quite unique in his time.
And this gets to our
which is far
topic.
removed from Southern Maryland.
Well,
but anyway,
it's removed from Southern Maryland, but it is an important part of today's topic, which has been that of Catholicism in the United States. And a history in which there's a lot of difficulty, and yet at the same time, it's a history in which there was also this flourishing of Catholicism. I mean, Catholics are now the second best educated and second wealthiest religious group in the country. The Jewish community, who came at the same time as we, are the wealthiest and best educated, which go together, and we're second. And it's because we were able to flourish here in a way that we couldn't in Europe. And
That's
this
very
is
true. That's very true.
So there's a mixed history in the United States. There's also a lot of anti-Catholicism.
Tremendous. Oh.
Let's go back to some of the roots.
Sure.
You have this. I want to mention your book. It's called Pioneer Priest and Makeshift Altars, about the early priests.
About the history of the church in the 13 British colonies.
Right.
What we did. And yes, you so rightly point out, it does go back to Europe. And you could almost start with Francis Desales. I mean, in the sense that the man lived in that era and lived in the real hotbed of the Reformation. The Reformation, as we know so well, took on different characteristics wherever it happened to grow up.
Right.
Luther may have nailed his theses in 1517 in Germany, but Calvin, I would have to say, produced a far more devastating kind of theology as far as from the Catholic perspective than Luther ever did,
That's right.
And really was, well, not to be uncharitable, but we have to classify him as a real enemy of the church, I think. I can remember, just because of his own hatred of it and then what he tried to inculcate in the theological revolution, but the story always comes back to me years and years ago as a seminarian. We seminarians are wont to wander around all those countries, as you know, and I happened to be in Geneva, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see where Calvin is buried? So I staked out the cemetery. It was up rather high on a hill, as I recall, and I went in, and no clue where his grave would be, of course, and I asked a custodian who was working and who spoke rather good English if he could tell me where Calvin was buried. So over I went, and you had a large, somewhat large, wrought iron fence. Inside the fence was a bit of greenery, and in the middle of the greenery was a pole coming up, as though we're coming out of the ground, with a little cylindrical thing on top of the pole, and simply the initials J.C., John Calvin. The grave was as stark as his theology was.
Yes.
And an interesting thing. But in any event, the Reformation then took hold. It took hold in Switzerland, certainly. It took hold in Germany. But for our purposes, it took hold in England and had that same, very different, rather, configuration from what was known either in Switzerland or in Germany. Now, it came about, obviously, during the reign of Henry VIII and for the reason of his annulment from Catherine of Aragon not being granted and so on and so forth. But in any event, Henry probably never intended in the course of his life what would come after him.
That's right.
The intensity of it, for sure, he did not. And His daughter, Mary Tudor, who ultimately ascended to the throne of England, reigned for just a few years.
And so did his son Edward.
Edward, very briefly, young as the Prince Regent, he reigned, yes. But then Mary, of course, did not get the title Bloody Mary for no reason. I mean, obviously, there was no ecumenical feeling in those days. But her half-sister, Elizabeth, succeeded her. She was the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn. She reigned for decades. And, I mean, Mary's persecution of Protestants was nothing in comparison to her half-sister's persecution of Catholics over a much, much, much longer reign. Well, in any event, we don't want to get into too much depth just on England itself. But for our purposes here, we want to get to the Stuart reign, which followed the Tudors, of course, particularly the reign of Charles I and George Calvert, who was so very, very highly placed in the administration of the king, Charles Stuart. And Calvert, it's always been speculated why George Calvert converted to Catholicism. I mean, probably he was returning to the roots of his faith, but who the specific influences were. In fact, one account I read was a particular English Jesuit who had a strong influence on bringing Calvert back into the faith. May very, very well have been. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, he probably committed the most serious sin a public official in England could commit by becoming a Catholic. And yet the king had such regard for him that he didn't just throw him out, so to speak. Rather, he
throw him under the sword.
Or throw him under the sword is right at Tyburn or one of these places, you know. No, indeed. He gave him a large tract of land, first of all in Newfoundland, in present-day Canada, which did not work because of the severity of the winter. The people just did not think they could form a colony. So ultimately, another charter was granted to Calvert, and that was, of course, for not so much the colony of Maryland, but we should more properly refer to it as the Palatinate of Maryland. And the Palatinate was an extraordinary grant of both political and religious power, so to speak, that Calvert was being given, because it contained in the Constitution, the charter, yes, of the colony, it contained what was referred to as a Bishop of Durham clause, and that refers back to the Palatinate of Durham, which, as you know, is on the English-Scottish border. And the Bishop of Durham was just as powerful a political leader as he was a religious leader. That same sweep and breadth of powers, Charles I wanted to give George Calvert, not because Calvert necessarily intended to rule in that kind of fashion, but rather because of the esteem in which he was held at court in England. Mm-hmm. In any event, it would fall not to George Calvert, nor to his son Cecil Calvert, but to Cecil's brother Leonard Calvert, who actually would be the one who would accompany the expedition of the Ark and the Dove into St. Clement's Island in southern Maryland,
and
where the first Mass was offered.
Yeah, Ark and the Dove were two ships.
Two ships, yes.
That had these Catholic colonists.
Catholic colonists, along with members of the Church of England, along with indentured servants. So it was not a monolithic Catholic group. And that's I think, an important point. Father Andrew White, a marvelous English Jesuit, was really the leader, I think we could call him. And Brother Thomas Gervais was an English Jesuit brother. Father John Altham was the other Jesuit. So they were the three who came on the initial expedition into St. Clement's Island, where I'm sure you probably have visited over the years. And I've said Mass there, and have you ever said Mass?
No, I've never. I don't.
You have to go out on a boat from the.
Yeah, I've not been to Maryland very often.
Look at that. Well, this is
to go.
You got a treat in store, and the beautiful museum there accompanies the little journey shipboard that you have to take out to St. Clement's Island. But in any event, that's where the first Mass was said. Now, political life began in what today would be St. Mary's County and in St. Mary's City, which was the original capital of the colony. An extremely, extremely important point. And I think if we would take nothing else from this broadcast tonight, Father, I hope we take this point. The Catholics had a certain political ascendancy in southern Maryland, but they didn't have it for long. Remember, they got there in 1634. Now, Cromwell comes in about 15 years later in England, at the period of the Protectorate and Commonwealth, the rise, the Puritan ascendancy in England, which was a corresponding Puritan ascendancy in the colony of Maryland.
And, it's important to note what you had said earlier, the Puritans were following a certain form of the theology of John Calvin.
They were Calvinists,
And
absolutely.
this is what they were bringing, and they were fighting against the Anglicans, who were also
They were
Protestant.
indeed.
The English Civil War had was different forms of Protestantism.
Different forms of Protestantism, absolutely.
Fighting
And
each other.
another very good point, Father, you bring up that leads me to think of this. There was a Canadian author some years ago by the name of George Grant. And Grant was responsible for writing a lot of wonderful books and political studies and so forth. He was one of these men like, very similar to C.S. Lewis and T.S. Eliot and these people. You would wonder why he did not become a Catholic. He was a high Anglican all his life. But George Grant had an interesting statement in one of his scholarly articles talking about the beginnings of North America. He said, "Contemplation never crossed the ocean." Excellent point when you stop to think about it. We leave Catholic decadence in Europe. We give honor and glory to God every moment of the day, said Calvin, by work, work, work. And, if we become enormously wealthy, that may very well be somewhat of a sign that possibly, just possibly, we may be saved. We're probably not saved, but maybe we're saved, or some people are. It was this double predestination that he became so well known for. But in any event, this was the kind of mentality now that sprang up in colonial Maryland in the aftermath of the Cromwellian Revolution in England. So Catholics were immediately deposed from power. And it was always rough going, although not nearly as rough as it was in the 1650s. But as the colonial history of Maryland went on, it was kind of an ebb and flow, if you will. But the point we really want to make is this. When the Catholics were in control for that brief period of time, that first 15 years, absolute, total, complete religious toleration extended to everyone in the colony of Maryland. And plenty were coming in besides Catholics. It's extremely important. And I'll just make one other reference. I'll jump the story up about 50 more years and move up to New York. By that time, New York was a royal colony, and James, who had been the Duke of York, who was the brother of Charles II, was appointed the royal governor. And James then became finally James II of England. He was the last Catholic monarch after his brother died. And James appointed an Irishman by the name of Thomas Dongan to be the royal governor of New York. And the very, very same thing occurs in New York 50 years later under Governor Dongan. Total religious toleration, most particularly for even by then, the significant Jewish population you had in New York. Now, these were two isolated instances. They were 50 years apart, but they speak volumes of the Catholic mindset in politics. When you get the opposite mindset in politics, what happens? The persecuted, namely the Puritans who were persecuted in England, turn around, and once they have political power, they become the persecutors. And you find this in European and American migratory history over and over again.
In fact, they were persecutorial against Protestants who disagreed with them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that, who's that started Rhode Island colony? It was
Roger
Williams. Roger Williams started what we would now call the Baptists.
That's right.
And he wasn't allowed to stay in the Puritan colony of Massachusetts
Bay.
anymore.
That's right.
And Congregationalists who were not
Anne Hutchinson would be another one.
They had
she
to
was
go
murdered
over
on Long Island.
They had to go over to Connecticut.
Oh yes.
So that they were persecutorial to anybody who disagreed with them.
Positively.
As a matter of fact, it struck me this way too, as I've looked at some of this American history. The farther a Christian group is from Catholicism in their structure and sacramental theology, the less tolerant they are of diversity.
That is an excellent point and an absolutely true one. No question about it. And yet in the midst of this lack of tolerance, look what happened. Go back to colonial Maryland and look at the work of your own society. I mean, the Jesuit contribution was phenomenal in the colony of Maryland, and for decades, so you had places like St. Francis Xavier Manor, at Newtown Manor. I'm shortly going to give a mission there in their parish during Lent. And St. Ignatius of Chapel Point, on the Port Tobacco River, the famous Carmelite convent at Port Tobacco, and just the Catholic pilgrimage or Catholic tour of Southern Maryland is quite a phenomenal experience itself.
Yes.
You go back, you go through those old cemeteries and see the old English Catholic names, and you see at Chapel Point, you see the relic of the True Cross that Father Andrew White brought with him on the voyage. Incidentally, Father White, who gave up a very, very comfortable career as a professor in England, a well-educated man, to come over here on this colonial expedition, Father White mastered the dialect of the Piscataway Indians. He wrote a dictionary, English Piscataway. He also wrote a catechism in the Piscataway dialect or language, and he received the chief of the tribe and his wife and their children into the church. And spent many years in apostolic endeavor before he ultimately returned to England. Well, he wrote a marvelous narrative of the voyage to Maryland. I was listening to somebody talk about learning about America. It was a Catholic sister, actually. She was talking about how much she had learned about the United States. She was not an American native herself, but from William Bradford's accounts of the Pilgrim's Progress and so forth. And I was thinking to myself, that good sister should have read Father White, because she would have known the tremendous obstacles the Catholics had, first in leaving England and being able to get out of England safely, and then the very, very treacherous voyage that they had for so long, for so many months. And it's another interesting point, I think, is that these were really wealthy Catholic gentry who came to Southern Maryland, and they were people of means, and they wanted to establish in Maryland, particularly in southern. Charles County and St. Mary's County and so forth. They wanted to establish the same kind of a life they had known in England, the same kind of comforts. And you have these large manor homes springing up, and you even have the Jesuits with building large manor homes and at least somewhat rudimentary schools. I say rudimentary because you couldn't have higher education in the colonies. A Catholic was not allowed. You certainly could have no admission to any of our colonial colleges like Princeton or William and Mary or Brown or any of them.
Well,
I'll tell you an interesting story on that.
Also, so folks understand, Harvard, Princeton,
all religious schools in their day.
They were seminaries.
As
well as Puritan schools and other forms of Protestant. And Catholics could not go.
No way. And an interesting point on that, I must tell you this as well, it ties in rather directly. Again, a marvelous contribution of the English Jesuits. There were schools on the continent. There were seminaries for the training of priests. And of course, in Rome, you have the Venerabile, the English college, and what have you. But there really was no place for young men, whether they be from England or from the American colonies, to get a higher education. You were a young American man in the British colonies here. There was no conceivable way. It wasn't going to happen. You had to go to the continent of Europe. So the English Jesuits under Father Robert Parsons, whose name you know very well,
right.
and a marvelous man, began the College of the English Jesuits at Saint-Omer in France, which is not terribly far from the Belgian border. And it was for young men to receive a higher education, what we would consider college today. The three Carrolls went there, Archbishop Carroll and his brother Daniel Carroll and their cousin Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Thomas Lloyd from England, who was we always refer to him as the father of American stenography. He was there at Federal Hall in New York when Washington was giving his inaugural address. He took the whole thing down in shorthand. He was also a graduate of the English Jesuit College. Well, in any event, in October, Archbishop Laurie led a group of about 7 or 8 of us over to Saint-Omer. The Saint-Omer Foundation has opened up a very, very fine contact now with the cultural exchange, religious exchange with the Archdiocese of Baltimore, which of course was headed by John Carroll, from 1780, from 1790 on.
That was the first archdiocese,
first diocese, and then made an archdiocese in 1808, and the suffragan sees were then divided: New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Bardstown. But anyway, that was a great work of the English Jesuits that so many of these young English Catholic men in colonial America profited from very, very directly, going to the English Jesuit College at St. Omer and receiving not only a higher education, but a very, very strict Catholic education. So it's, again, an enormous contribution the Society of Jesus made, no question.
This is, and this is something that is worth thinking about when you consider how important Catholic education. I'd mentioned at the outset that we're the second best educated and second wealthiest religious community in the country. But it's because of the dedication of priests, brothers, and sisters.
That's right.
For the most part. Lay people too. But in the earlier days, it was the religious
who
Jesuits made it possible.
Yes, sure. And even, of course, on the eve of the American Revolution, the society was suppressed for about 25 years. And these former Jesuits were now diocesan priests. But the work continued, you know. I mean, and they were under the Vicar Apostolic of the London district, who could not use the title bishop because he lived in England. But Richard Challoner was probably one of the best-known names of Vicar Apostolic to whom the priests in the American colonies were accountable. So in any event, but you know, the next part of the story, and once again involving the Society of Jesus, would have been Catholic colonial Pennsylvania. And it took on a very different configuration there than it had in Maryland because the cosmopolitan nature of society. And in that sense, I suppose you can say that colonial Pennsylvania and the growth of the Catholic Church in colonial Pennsylvania, specifically in the city of Philadelphia, really resembled more what the church in the United States would ultimately become. It would be so much the church of the urban and city dweller, the church of the immigrant, you know, who would settle the eastern seaboard in large numbers. But honestly, the role that those Jesuits took on, Father Grayton would be one example, and Father Ferdinand Farmer would be Steinmeier, who changed his name to Ferdinand Farmer, and so forth. They were cosmopolitan dwellers in Philadelphia, and they were, you know, very, very much accepted men in the city of Philadelphia. But at the same time, they were tremendous itinerant missionaries, and they went out to places in south central and southeastern Pennsylvania. So many foundations that today would be in the Diocese of Harrisburg or in the Diocese of Allentown, if you will, but original churches and stories of Jesuits saying Mass in farmhouses and all this kind of thing. So your society has done much, much, much wonderful work in the colonial history of this country, no doubt about it. And it should be emphasized, the genuinely saintly Jesuits who did so much to build up the faith.
And just also, so we mentioned another element of why Pennsylvania was such a place that was possible is that William Penn, who had founded Pennsylvania Colony as a Quaker colony, also had freedom of religion, the religious toleration.
He did. Penn himself had a rather low opinion of Catholicism.
Right.
But as a Quaker, he is much to his credit, much to the credit of the Quakers in general. They put into effect much toleration, and it extended over a larger period of time. But there seemed to be, even with this very benign attitude of Penn and so many of the Philadelphia Quakers, there seemed to be a rather significant number of loopholes, so to speak, that you could get a Catholic here, you can get a Catholic there, and so on and so forth. So there were, I would say, as the years went on in Pennsylvania, you saw the restrictions grow a little bit. But generally speaking, at least as far as the public practice of the faith was concerned, William Penn could not be commended highly enough, I think, for his views.
Especially in contrast to other states
or
colonies.
Lord, yes. The other colonies.
And even after independence, some of the states still would not allow Catholics to hold
for years and years and years. Yes,
yeah.
You move into the 19th century, and I mean, the pieces of legislation that stayed on state statute books as regards voting rights, as regards holding political office, owning property. X number of years residency requirements before one could become a citizen of the United States. These were every one of them geared to get Catholics. I often think that our Catholic people don't, really and truly know how much we suffered in this country.
Yes.
And we suffered plenty.
Yeah.
We hear much about so much discrimination thrown at so many groups, but I don't know that the Catholic population knows how much discrimination was thrown at us.
And that included burning convents,
Oh, terrible, terrible.
schools.
The Ursuline Convent in Charlestown, Massachusetts would be a
Right.
good example. The Kensington riots in Philadelphia in the 19th century, where within 12 or 14 people, I believe, yes, it was, 14 people lost their lives in a crossfire on one given day in May of 1844, just in the midst of this sectarian violence
Right.
in the Kensington section of Philadelphia. St. Patrick's Old Cathedral in New York City on the Lower East Side. John Hughes, was this tyrant of a bishop. I mean, he really made New York a real bully pulpit in his day. And he said, if one church in this city is attacked, the city will become a second Moscow. And he was referring, of course, to all the revolutionary history of the Russian people. But by golly,
Because
they
they were-
backed down.
Yeah, 'cause-
Hughes was so strong, they backed down. And there is a plaque to this day on St. Patrick's Old Cathedral commending most particularly an Irish group called the Ancient Order of Hibernians, who
Yes.
came to the defense of St. Patrick's Cathedral in the face of this tremendous hostility and bigotry. It's just gone on, Father. And
Well, one of the problems we have a certain hostility to this point, where we've run out of time for this section. So we're going to
heavens.
have to bend our heads over to this break. But we will take a break for 2 minutes, come back, and we will take your questions and your comments. If you want to know about American Catholic history, now's the time to ask. So please stay with us. Right. Well, I don't know how it is in some places up the north. I think there's still been some snow, but the roads are kind of pretty clear down here. And if you get a chance to travel down to Alabama, we would love to have you stop and be part of our studio audiences, as well as join us at Mass. And you can contact our pilgrimage department by going to pilgrimages@EWTN.com. Pilgrimages@EWTN.com. Or you can call them at 205-271-2966. And we'd love to have you here. You get to visit not only here at EWTN, but also at the convent, the Shrine of Most Blessed Sacrament up in Hansville. Now, before we get to our questions, just want to, you're teaching at the seminary.
yes,
Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg,
Maryland. Right, just a couple miles from the Pennsylvania, Maryland border.
Okay.
Just down the road from famous town of Gettysburg. We're maybe 8 or 9 miles from there.
Oh.
And we have a very, very wonderful student body and a wonderful faculty. And I, for one, can't figure out why every bishop in the country does not send men to Mount St. Mary's Seminary, Father.
Yeah, well,
you'd love to teach there, wouldn't you? Just say yes.
Yeah.
I knew
sure.
I knew you'd agree with me. It is a marvelous place with an exceptionally fine student body. We have a wonderful rector and vice rector and great faculty, really. And it's such a solid house of formation for these young men to train for the priesthood, where they're receiving a very solid theological grounding and also very intensely spiritual program as well, you know, so they come out well molded priests, believe me.
I have been impressed.
We're second oldest in the country, by the way.
Is
1808, yeah. Founded by John Dubois and Brute and these great people, you know.
Well, I've been impressed with the improvement in so many seminaries around the country.
Oh, sure, yes.
And as a result, of course, there are more vocations.
Indeed, there are.
If they're going to be a place that nourishes the faith, then they're going to get vocations.
Yeah, no question about it. May they all come to Mount St. Mary's.
I don't think you have that much room.
No.
Not all
We
of
can
them.
squeeze a couple more in.
You can get a few more. Well, are you ready for a question?
Certainly,
Let's
sure.
start off with this gentleman over here. Sir, where are you from?
From Centerville, Indiana.
Good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Father.
Is that in the center of the state?
It is east of Indianapolis, almost to the Ohio line.
Okay, so it's not quite, because Indianapolis is the center.
Correct.
You just took the name. Centerville.
Sort of.
So what's your question?
What particular aspects, Father, of Catholicism did the early Puritans really have trouble with?
Every single one, as far as I can see. Now, they, well, certainly you'd have to go first, I think, to the liturgical area. And I mean, one of the largest complaints, if you will, of the Puritans, first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. You have the Puritans and you have the Separatists. The Separatists were those who actually left the Church of England. They were what we talk about when we talk about the pilgrimage, you know, on Plymouth Plantation, and they were the ones that had the first Thanksgiving and all this stuff. The Puritans in Massachusetts Bay, though they were totally different from the Church of England, nonetheless always considered themselves members of it and wanted to see the Church of England purified from within. Now, one of the chief ways that you purify the Church of England is that you remove all vestiges of Romanism. Now, the Church of England had done a pretty good job of hacking out statues and knocking out windows, you know, with religious images on them and crucifixes and holy water fonts and all the rest. But the Puritans would certainly have said that the C of E didn't go nearly far enough. I mean, they wanted, you know, you think of these congregational churches and meeting houses in New England, and you see how absolutely plain they are and so forth. That's the kind of thing that the Puritans really were going after. Theologically, it would be more people like John Calvin and Puritan ministers rather than the average person in the pew. They would not necessarily have been that in-depth. But one of the big things, of course, was the absolute connection between church and state. You had to, in the Bay Colony, for example, you had to be a fully incorporated church member before you could become a fully incorporated political member of the Bay Colony. And younger generations of Puritans were just simply not interested in this full incorporation business because they were not necessarily ascribing to all the tenets of Puritanism, the biblical fundamentalism, I suppose, would be one thing that younger people would, even in those days, have raised their eyebrows at and so forth. So very, very few of them were coming over to full incorporation in the church, which meant that fewer of them would be fully incorporated chartered members of the colony as well. And so they came up with the idea of the halfway covenant about in the mid-17th century, where you didn't have to quite ascribe to everything as long as you pledged basic allegiance. And
right.
That saved the system for a brief while, but Puritanism eventually evolved into the congregational system that we know today. But sacramental theology was thrown out the door, obviously. I mean,
And papacy, how did they feel about the papacy?
I mean, the Pope was, good Lord,
Antichrist.
He was the Antichrist, and there would be some kind of a tunnel dug under the ocean. The Pope and his legions would make their way across the country and try to take the country over if Catholics were allowed to get any kind of political power at any time. Right. They were among the most militant. There's no question, the Puritans. But
one of the things that shows up as in some ways an oddity to us. Though it's revived in a certain way, they had the first war on Christmas was done by the Puritans. Mm-hmm. You were fined if you sang Christmas carols, had a Christmas pudding, or any such kind of English celebration of Christmas.
Correct.
That was absolutely forbidden.
It sure was.
Yeah, streng verboten. And they would then go over to celebrate more of Thanksgiving as the alternative.
As the alternative.
Yeah.
It's very true. Very
Yep.
true.
Yeah, that was, but that was the Puritans did the first war on Christmas.
On Christmas, absolutely.
Now it's the unbelievers. All right, let us now go to Thomas. Thomas, where are you calling from?
Kingsport, Tennessee.
Good to have you. And what is your question?
Well, first of all, let me preface it by saying I understand a lot of what Father Connor's talking about. I really appreciate him being here with us because I love to watch the church in time.
Thomas, I had brown hair in those days when I used to do the church in time.
What's that, Father?
I say I had brown hair back in those days when I used to do the church in time.
And so did I.
I'm glad you remember it anyway.
But I want to tell you, don't let my Tennessee accent fool you. I'm actually from 35 miles south of the Mason-Dixon line, which would put me smack in Baltimore.
Oh,
so
sure.
That's where I'm from originally.
Almost a neighbor of ours, yes.
That's correct. But I wanted to ask this question. You know, we're talking about the 13 colonies. I live in an area now in Kingsport, Tennessee, where we're less than 1% Catholic. Right. And we experience, believe it or not, still experience some of those not-so-niceties that come to newcomers in this area as Catholics. So first let me say that. So I've experienced that. But thank the Lord that I've had that formation in Baltimore. Second, with the Reformation and the times in the 20th century and the times that we're in now, like secular humanism and moral relativism and materialism, Father Connor, what do you feel is the most important element of the church? You know, whether it be the Eucharist, whether it be devotion to Mary, whether it be raising saints for our time, what will carry us through this time of what a lot of people feel that we're in desperation or in despair?
Well, I think, first of all, I think every one of those that you mentioned, most particularly the Eucharist, devotion to the entirety of the church teaching of the magisterium, devotion to Our Lady, as you say. It's interesting, too, Thomas, you raised the idea there of the moral relativism of the age in which we live. This can be, you know, contrary to all of the things, the events that have gone before, the kind of things we're talking about here tonight, moral relativism can also serve to be, I think, quite a great unifier of people in this 21st century, in the sense that, you know, we're all, Pope Benedict talked about the forgetfulness of God. Moral relativism is just another way of speaking of that. And it's interesting, even the pro-life movement has brought Catholics and evangelicals together in a common cause. So, you know, any and all God-fearing people can agree on this, I think, the culture that you so very well described for us today. Rather than being a divider, it should indeed be a unifier of people. And I think, you know, the more quickly people see this, you know, their role to stand up and take a stand against this forgetfulness of God, whatever form that forgetfulness takes in life. I think that you know, the country, the culture, is at least taking a first step at coming back. But God knows something needs to be done. I mean, it's when you think of it, huh? But it's interesting too to hear you say about. I've always contended that all forms of anti-Catholicism, while they change, they're still present, and I can sympathize with what you may have experienced in your own locale. But I keep coming back to a quote that was first made by Arthur Schlesinger Sr. Senior and Junior were both historians, and Junior served in some function with Kennedy, as I recall, in his administration. Well, this would be his father now who made this statement. But Schlesinger Sr. said, anti-Catholicism is the deepest seated bias in the American people. You know, I mean, I have not found anything substantial to contradict that statement. I think there's much truth in it.
And I think it's changed.
Particulars, yes.
With the present time, you know, in a place like Kingsport, Tennessee, I know the area. I lived in Tennessee, and Catholicism is very poorly known. It's mythologized. Along the way, there are myths of Catholicism that they inherited from the Pilgrims in some of the early colonial days.
And the belief that, or the concept they have that we are told what to believe.
Exactly.
That's another big one with them.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
But I see the bigger problem with the secular progressive movement, that it sees us as their primary enemy on issues like abortion. And I truly
the church,
see
you mean,
them,
or Christian people in general?
No, Christian people, but the
God-fearing
Catholic
people
Church,
in general, let's say.
The Catholic
Church in particular. Yes.
And, you know, for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that I also sense very strongly is that the progressive secular mindset is a brand new form of godless Puritanism. It's Puritanism without the Bible or God. In this sense, they want to have, they're worried about too many people because there's too much spending. There's a Puritan quality of not enjoying certain things because it ruins the environment. And they're apocalyptic. Their sense of the end times is not that Christ is coming, but global warming is coming. That they see this as the new apocalypse, the secular apocalypse. And if you disagree with that apocalyptic, you are a bad person. You're ruining the world, and you want more people. And Catholics just want to have more people. And people are the ruination of the world, not unlike Calvin's total depravity.
Total depravity,
just by your very existence.
No question of it. No, excellent point.
But the problem is, Calvin and the Puritans, etc., still believed that they stood before God's judgment, and that they had the Bible to correct their behavior. When you are a relativist, then there's nothing to stop you from doing evil. Then you are willing to do anything. The end that you're trying to accomplish justifies any means. And this is why atheists are the most vicious people in history, as we know from last century, killing 305 million people, mostly by atheist states. Let's take another caller. We have Sylvia on the line. Sylvia, where are you calling from?
Good evening, Father. I'm from Miami.
And
I'm the
welcome.
niece of a very faithful deceased Jesuit Bishop Enrique San Pedro. But I have to say, I enjoy the work of all the priests in the church. Father Connor, I enjoy your programs as well. Father, in your book, do you also speak of the history of the influx of Catholicism from Spain in the early 16th century? Because so far what you have spoken of is Catholicism in America in the 17th century, but we Catholics came to America in early 16th century from Spain.
Absolutely, yes. And no, both the Spanish and the French colonizing efforts certainly predate what I'm talking about in this book. There's no doubt about that. No, but to answer your question, Sylvia, I don't know. I don't talk about either the Spanish or the French Canadian, if you will, because I wanted to concentrate on the 13 specific colonies that originally formed themselves into the United States in 1789 under the federal Constitution. In fact, the area you speak of that was colonized by, for example, the Spanish, whether it be in the Floridas or out in California, the great work of Father Serra and the missions out there, or the French Jesuits, again, Isaac Jogues and his companions, who came down from Quebec, of course, and into upstate New York. That is a story of unto itself. It's a story which really, in many ways, predates some of the things we're talking about here, and really could be the subject, and has been the subject of many books and and specified studies. So no, this is only on the English colonies themselves, and the church's struggle, if you will.
But it is true that the oldest churches, Protestant or Catholic, are Catholic churches.
Are Catholic churches.
In New Mexico.
In New Mexico, very definitely.
And in Florida.
And in Florida, and St. Augustine, and these places.
Those were,
Mission of Nombre de Dios in St. Augustine was a great one, yes.
And
as I say, it's a story of unto itself. That's
right.
And should be a new book, maybe.
Exactly. Well, it's a specialized area because you don't only have to know Spanish, but you have to understand 16th century Spanish, which would be like trying to understand Shakespearean English.
That's very true.
So it's another, like Don Quixote and that. But there are people who live in Colorado and New Mexico that still speak a 16th century type of dialect of Spanish because they're the descendants of those very old colonists.
They are, and when you think about it, both the Spanish and the French, one specific thought is that they were living among their own co-religionists. Right. In both instances, and so while their adversity took different forms, it didn't necessarily take the form that it took here in the 13 colonies.
Right. If anything, Protestants had a difficult time in the Spanish colonies.
They would have, certainly.
Because not only the Spanish didn't allow. Spain didn't have much of a Protestant presence. No. And if you were Protestant, you weren't allowed to go to the colonies at all.
That's right. That's very true.
And you couldn't be in the colonies. So they had no freedom of religion, and that was something that was true even when the Americans went into Texas in the 1830s
Texas
and such.
And New Mexico, yes.
So that
That's right.
And that, in one sense, enters our history at a later period also than the earlier...
When these places attain statehood, sure.
Right, that these colonies are earlier than the English colonies, but the English-speaking people didn't have contact with them until later.
These are quite a bit later. That's true.
Specialized history that...
You take the missions around San Antonio, there are at least 4 or 5 of them that predate, and the famous one in Arizona, where Father Eusebio Kino was,
Right, the Jesuits were the
Jesuits,
the missionaries in Arizona.
San Salvador del Bac, that's what I'm trying to think of, yes.
And also around El Paso.
And El Paso,
that was also Jesuit missionary work there until we were suppressed. We were supposed to be the missionaries of California, but because of the suppression you mentioned, if anybody's seen the movie The Mission, you see there some of the story of the Jesuits being kicked out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that goes on because of the influence of the Masonic Lodge in Spain and France.
Portugal. Yes, sure.
And had a big impact, which it also, some of the anti-Catholicism was related to the Masonic lodges here as well.
Oh, very much so, yes.
I don't think that's the case now, but through the 19th century, that was a tension.
Yeah, because of the strength they had here, there's no question about that. And the higher one rose in the Masonic orders, it was almost a badge of anti-Catholicism at one time in this country to be wearing. You were very, very decidedly leaning in one direction if you were
and membership
high up in their order.
Membership in the Masonic Lodge was forbidden to Catholics.
Indeed it was, yes.
Since the lodge was founded in 1715.
Although a few Catholics broke the rules, and joined here and there. Few still do, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
But that's also streng verboten.
Indeed.
Well, Father, I want to thank you for writing this book, Pioneer Priests, the Makeshift Altars. It's important for us to know our history. Just like Thomas had asked, what should we do? One of the things we need to do is know our history.
Oh, sure.
And in a democracy, when people are ignorant, that's when tyrants can take over, and we have to be very, very cautious of that. So learning our history and learning the doctrines of our faith are absolutely
They almost
essential.
go hand in hand, Father, don't they?
Almost.
Almost.
No, they go hand in hand. Of course they do. You got to do both.
Indeed.
Father, would you join me in giving a blessing
I'd
to our
be
audience?
honored to, surely.
May Almighty God bless you all and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you and lead you in all of your ways by His peace, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you know, we can have Father Connor doing the series that he does. We can keep bringing him here now for 21 years, and still we're learning from you. And we can bring him as well as all the other guests that we have had on this network, but only because this network is brought to you by you. Mother was inspired to have this network not financed by advertising and such, but to be financed by you. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, and we will pay all our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.